Tuscaloosa was a paramount chief of a Mississippian chiefdom in what is now the U.S. state of Alabama. His people were possibly ancestors to the several southern Native American confederacies who later emerged in the region. The modern city of Tuscaloosa, Alabama is named for him. Tuscaloosa is notable for leading the Battle of Mabalar at his fortified village against the Spanish conquistador Hernando de Soto. After being taken hostage by the Spanish as they passed through his territory, Tuscaloosa organized a surprise attack on his captors at Mabalar, but was ultimately defeated. Contemporary records describe the paramount chief as being very tall and well-built, with some of the chroniclers saying Tuscaloosa stood a foot and a half taller than the Spaniards. His name, derived from the Western Muskogee language elements Tasca and Lusa, means black warrior. The Soto expedition. Tuscaloosa and his chiefdom are recorded in the chronicles of Hernando de Soto's expedition, which arrived in North America in 1539. De Soto had been appointed governor of Cuba by King Carlos I of Spain, who directed him to conquer Florida, which was taken to comprise what is now the southern United States, as adelantado. In 1539, De Soto landed near Tampa, Florida with 600–1,000 men and 200 horses and began a circuitous exploration of modern-day Florida, Georgia, South Carolina and Alabama, often engaging in violent conflict with the indigenous peoples. As they traveled, the expedition kidnapped natives to act as bearers and interpreters of the many different language families of the Southeast. The conquistadors frequently took a local chief hostage to guarantee safe passage through his territory. By October 1540, the expedition had reached the middle of modern-day Alabama, province of Tuscaloosa. Tuscaloosa's province consisted of a series of villages, mostly along the Coosa and Alabama rivers. Each village had its own chief who was a vassal to Tuscaloosa, the paramount chief. After traveling through the Coosa province, the De Soto expedition came to the village of Tennessee on September 18, 1540, near the modern town of Childersburg, Alabama. The chief of Tennessee and his vassals had fled the town before them, but De Soto sent messages to the chief, who returned on September 25. Once Chief Tennessee had shown his obedience by supplying the Spaniards with requested deer skins, food, bearers, and women, De Soto released the paramount chief of Coosa, whom they had held hostage while traveling through his territory. Chief Coosa was angry that he was taken so far from his home village and that De Soto still held his sister, who was probably the mother of his successor as chief according to the region's matrilineal system. De Soto evidently thought Tennessee was subject to Coosa, although the village was closer to Tuscaloosa. As such, the chief may have had dual allegiances to both chiefdoms and balance between them. Tuscaloosa sent an envoy led by his son and several head men to meet the Spanish in Tennessee. The envoy intended to assess Spanish expedition in order to prepare a trap for them. The Spanish rested at Tennessee for several weeks, then departed on October 5. During the next several days, they reached about one village of the Tuscaloosa province per day. These included Casista, situated on a stream, and Caxa, another village on a stream, possibly Hatter Creek, the boundary between the Coosa and the Tuscaloosa. The next day they camped on the Coosa River, across from the village of Humatia, near the mouth of Shoal Creek. On October 8 they came to a newly built settlement named Uxapata, possibly near modern Wetumpka, Alabama. On October 9, De Soto crossed the Tallapoosa River, and by the end of the day, his party was within a few miles of Tuscaloosa's village, Atahachi. De Soto sent a messenger to tell the chief he and his army had arrived, and the chief responded that they could go to the court whenever De Soto liked. The next day De Soto sent Luis de Moscoso Alvarado to tell the chief that they were on their way. The Paramount village was a large, recently built, fortified community with a platform mound and plaza. Upon entering the village, De Soto was taken to meet the chief under a portico on top of the mound. Moscoso and his men mounted their horses and galloped around the plaza, playing juego de canas, a dangerous sport involving jousting with lances. The men occasionally feinted toward Tuscaloosa, hoping to frighten him, a technique of manipulation De Soto had used against the Inca Atahualpa at Cajamarca. The chief sat as though unconcerned. Afterward the Indians served the Spaniards food, and the residents of Atahachi danced in the plaza, reminding the Spaniards of rural dances in their own country. When De Soto demanded porters and women from the chief said that he was accustomed to being served, and not vice versa. De Soto had Tuscaloosa taken hostage. The expedition began making plans to leave the next day, and Tuscaloosa relented, providing bearers for the Spaniards. He informed De Soto that they would have to go to his town of Mabalar to receive the women. De Soto gave the chief a pair of boots and a red cloak to reward him for his cooperation. The expedition departed Atahachi on October 12, and the next day arrived in the village of Piachi, situated high on a cliff overlooking the Alabama River. Here the Spaniards began noticing signs of resistance from the native population. De Soto demanded canoes from the people of Piachi, but the chief claimed his people did not have any. The expedition was forced to wait 2 days as they built rafts to cross to the north side of the river. After crossing, they noticed that 2 Spaniards were missing, Juan de Villalobos and an unnamed man looking for a runaway Indian slave. De Soto ordered Tuscaloosa to have his people produced or he would be burned at the stake. The chief said only that the men would be returned at Mabalar. On October 18, De Soto and the expedition arrived at Mabalar, a small, heavily fortified village situated on a plain. It had a wooden palisade encircling it, with bastions every so often for archers to shoot from. The Spaniards knew something was amiss. The population of the town was almost exclusively male, young warriors and men of status. There were several women, but no children. The Spaniards also noticed the palisade had been recently strengthened, and that all trees, bushes and even weeds had been cleared from outside the settlement for the length of a crossbow shot. Outside the palisade in the field, they saw an older warrior haranguing younger men, or leading them in mock skirmishes and military exercises. Battle of Mabalar. As De Soto approached the town, the chief of Mabalar came out to greet him, bringing him 3 robes of marten skins as a gift. De Soto and several of his men dismounted and entered the town, as the native bearers placed the Spaniards' supplies next to the palisade. The Mabilians danced and sang to the Spaniards, seemingly to allay their fears and to distract them. While the spectacle unfolded, Tuscaloosa told De Soto he was tired of marching with the Spaniards, and wished to stay in Mabalar. De Soto refused, and the chief asked to confer with some of his nobles in one of the large wattle and daub houses on the plaza. De Soto sent Juan Ortiz to retrieve him, but the Mabilians refused him entrance to the house. Tuscaloosa told De Soto and his expedition to leave in peace, or he and his allies would force him to leave. When De Soto sent men into the house to retrieve the chief, they discovered it was full of armed warriors prepared to protect their chief. De Soto asked the chief of Mabalar to demand the porters promised by Tuscaloosa, and the Spaniards would leave. The man refused, and a Spaniard grabbed him. In the ensuing scuffle, the chief had his arm cut off by the Spaniard's sword. With this, the Mabilians attacked the Spanish, who immediately ran for the gate and their horses. Natives came from all of the houses and attacked the Spaniards. The Mabilians grabbed the provisions and equipment left outside the palisade and brought the supplies into the town. After making it outside, the Spaniards regrouped and assaulted the village. After numerous assaults and many hours, the Spaniards were able to hack holes into the walls of the palisade and re-enter the town. After the battle, Mabilians, the Spaniards burned down Mabalar, and nearly all the Mabilians and their allies were killed, either in the battle, in the subsequent fires, or by suicide. Chief Tuscaloosa's son was found among the dead, although the chief was not. Biedma asserts that over 5,000 were in the town, of which almost none was able to escape. For several weeks afterward, the Spanish made forays to neighboring villages for supplies of maize, deer skins, and other goods, finding many wounded and dead Mabilians in the houses. The natives had made two serious mistakes. They had not realized Spaniards' advantage when mounted on horses, and they had relied too heavily on their palisade. Once the Spanish breached the palisade, the Mabilians were too crowded in the village to mount a successful defense. Over the next few centuries, the Tuscaloosa, Coosa, Plaquemine Mississippian peoples from the Mississippi and Pearl River valleys, and other native peoples came together to form a confederacy that became the historic tribe known as the Choctaw.